I think it's not just relating to designers or brands. I think it's relating to the way you show up. So I have an attitude towards anything that I do, that if I didn't need to do it for money, and if my job didn't depend on it, how would I do it differently?
And you're live on Dead Radio.
Welcome to another very special episode of Dead Radio with your boy Ini. And once again, we have a very special guest in the building, reporting live from 138 SMUTS, the Dead Store. We're going to let our guest introduce herself, and then we're going to dive into her life story and, hopefully extract those jewels for you guys to use in your everyday lives. So without further ado.
Hey, I'm Robynne Kahn, and I've been asked the question, what do I do? Which I've explained is like my most stressful question to answer. I am a curator of opportunities in the fashion world, if I can say that. A joiner of dots, babes.
I love that.
I mean, we're changing all the time. I hate having a title.
I actually think you should put that on your Instagram bio today.
It says I'm a multi-hyphen act.
Yeah, but like, what does that mean? Slash.
Yeah.
But I love dot connector in fashion. I think to predict the future, right, we have to go into the past. And to know who Robyn is today, we have to start her book from page 1. So tell us where Robyn grew up, what type of young lady Robyn was.
I'm very old, babe. It's going to take a very long time for me to
don't
go
worry.
through the whole story, babes. You got an OG here.
We'll hit the highlights.
Okay, so basically I'm from Cape Town, and I grew up in a very large family of 6 children. I had lots of hand-me-downs, and I had a mother who always wanted to put me in dresses. So I think from a very early age, I saw fashion as something which was enforced on me in a certain way that I didn't want to actually partake in. And my late father, he was in retail, in suiting. My great-grandfather, he was a tailor. So there was a genetic line exactly to creating fashion elements. There was a lineage there. However, I never studied fashion. I actually did 7 years at university learning everything about nothing.
Like most people.
Yeah, I learned, I had very interesting dinner conversations. That's what I learned at university.
I hear that.
A little bit of something about everything. Yeah. And I kind of fell into fashion by luck and chance, really. It was covering for a fashion assistant in the days of the magazines of Huisgenoot and You magazine. And I fell into the place. My husband was a hair and makeup artist, and the stylist that he was doing hair and makeup for a job, her assistant fell ill, and they needed someone to take her space. And my husband said, my wife can do it. She's got amazing style, and she's available because it's university holidays. And literally, that's how I landed up falling into the world of fashion.
So fashion chose you. You didn't choose fashion.
I think that's kind of very much how life works, right?
Yeah,
we just have to lean into the opportunities that present themselves. And then, I think what makes South African incredible humans is that we have the ability to busk brilliantly.
I love that.
So, we really do know how to fake it till we make it.
As we should, right? I hear that.
The hustle is real, yeah. So I fell into fashion, yes.
Damn, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So as someone who comes from a lineage of, let's call them contributors to fashion, right? I think the most important question I'm probably going to ask you today is the age-old question of, are you born with style, or is style something that you learn in the world?
I really think it's a combination of both. I think it's a reaction to and a participation in. So I do get asked often, what is style? And I think that is just how you present yourself to the world in a way that shows the best version of you. And however that is understood, or whatever it is, which world you are trying to show up in to be the best version of yourself, I think fashion is the most incredible, powerful tool to show yourself to the world in the way that you want to be perceived. So, I mean, there's been lots of kind of surveys done that a regular person putting on a white coat, like a medical coat, is taken far more seriously than a person who is not in a medical coat, because that medical coat instantly gives an affirmation that this person has studied, or they have
a professional.
So if you look at that, it's the same way in which we show up in the world as to whatever it is that we are wanting to partake in. I always say, especially for when it comes to being in a professional environment, we don't always have the opportunity to speak. We don't always have the opportunity to have our voices heard, but you can always show up and take up space in what it is you're wearing.
I get that.
So the answer to that question is
both.
Is style something you're born with or something that you learn? I think that it's an old adage which doesn't really hold weight anymore.
It doesn't at all.
Because it's like saying what is the next trend, or what are the latest trends? I mean, that also doesn't hold weight anymore, right? After COVID,
that's true.
Right? After COVID,
that's very true.
We learned how to actually experience our own understanding of our own space. We were locked away. We didn't have the kind of infiltration, and the only influence we had was what we had available to us, whether that was online or what was in our wardrobes. Nobody shopped during COVID, right?
Of course not.
So new ways of presenting yourself to the world were developed in COVID. Even in that sense of almost incubation, you can look at how many incredible, especially from a South African perspective, how many incredible local fashion designers suddenly popped out. Where were they before COVID? Right?
They were there, but I feel like COVID was such a great resetter globally.
Exactly.
Right?
And after COVID, because we were so, the space kind of felt dark. You can see in terms of fashion after COVID, how all of a sudden bright colors, mixing of patterns, a lot of volume came through in fashion, where almost that self-protection, what we were wearing, which was the bubble skirts and huge sleeves and oversized coats and oversized pants. So again, it's like the question, are we born with style, or is it something we learn? It's the same thing I have towards trends. How do we anticipate trends? It's not aligned anymore to the way we are as individuals. Style is something that you create in order how you want to be perceived in the world.
I hear that. And I think that is the best answer. I think that age-old question comes from people who had access to clothes, fashion, were very elitist and were like, yeah, you guys can't be involved in this thing, right? Which, like, in the time that we're living in, like, it proves that that doesn't hold weight. Like, you can learn style.
Well, I've never ever been that person. I've never been a gatekeeper with anything, right from the outset of my career. Because I didn't come from a fashion-based environment. I didn't do design. I wasn't at a fashion school. I basically, as I said, I had a degree in nothing, but everything. So I did psychology and drama and English. And the thing that was incredible about being at university for so long is that you are with people who are way cleverer than you, right? But they share their knowledge, right? You can access just from a literature point of view, from a literary perspective, you have access to knowledge of the greatest minds through books. But when I entered fashion, I felt there was such a guarding, a gatekeeping mentality between, in my day, it was the fashion editors of magazines. There was such a guarding of what they knew and who they knew, and there was
what's coming.
Exactly, but it was never from a point of view of honesty. I never felt there was, and what I mean by that is in the magazine world at the time when I was a fashion director, is advertisers held far more power than the people in fashion themselves. So on a percentage level, for example, if we were doing an editorial, it had to be 80% advertisers' merchandise and 20% who you wanted to put in. So that in itself was a sense of guarding, right? That the only designers or fashion brands that were allowed into that space was those that paid to be there in the rest of the magazine. And fashion editors in those days, photographers included, hair and makeup artists, anybody who was in that industry, there definitely was a sense of, you can't sit with us.
Of course.
There was an elitism because it was a guarded environment that you didn't want anybody else to take your place.
Of course not.
So fashion editors, even though they had the most incredible support systems of amazing assistants, or those assistants were never given a platform
to shine,
to actually go, this was their work, or this was their idea, or it was always held by the fashion editor. And coming from the place that I came from, in a university environment where it's just a collective mind, where you have access to so much information, I kind of, I think, intuitively and instinctively applied that to
your job,
to my job. And I constantly looked for new up-and-comings, people who had a different way of working and a different way of putting things together or showing up. And, you know, if you're not sharing your information, your industry will die. So I came with that kind of intent, that whatever I knew from my own experiences as a fashion person in terms of helping brands who didn't have the access, or helping young up-and-coming fashion stylists who didn't have the access, they weren't let in. I always made sure that there was a way they could be brought in.
You could sneak them in. You were sneaking people in. I love that.
You know, in the days of the magazines, I really did try and sneak people in. But once again, you know, you were working for somebody else. So your ability to bring people in was also limited. And that's one of the reasons why I left print magazines and started a Fashion Friend back in the day, which was the first, you know, independently owned fashion platform. And there was the only thing that you needed was to show up in an interesting way, in a way that was creatively brave and bold, that was not, there was no platform that allowed that. I had no advertisers. You know, the platform wasn't held to financial ransom. It was just a beautiful collective coming together of talented, creative minds.
Purists.
Exactly how it was at university, right? You go to university to learn something, but you're equipped with some kind of intention of being there, is to learn more or to grow more or to upskill yourself. Well, that was the same attitude that I always had to fashion.
I get that. I believe that life is really about sampling, right? You go around and you sample, you take what you want, mix it with what you have. I really want to ask you your perspective on this, right? I could be wrong. My perspective is that people in different industries, right? When you're not traditionally trained in that art form or career path, you have a wider scope than people who are traditionally trained in that. And as someone who was non-traditionally trained, you seem to have found ways that people who are traditionally trained in fashion could never see, because your ceiling is not their ceiling. No. Because they learned. The thing about traditional learning is that it goes from A to Z. Mm-hmm. But non-traditional learning, you can start at D, go to X, come back to A, because you've learned it in a way that is your own, that has your own fingerprint. Am I wrong in my thinking?
I have a philosophy that the job is not the work you do. Your job is not the work you do. So for me, the work you do in your job are not necessarily aligned. And what I mean by that is, I studied psychology, I studied drama, I have what brings me joy is seeing other people having joy, right? So if you think about it, as a stylist and a fashion director and a copywriter and a curator, my joy is created by seeing other people having joy. So when I bring a brand into a shoot, the owner of that brand is experiencing joy. So what I'm saying is my job is not the work I do.
I understand.
So as a stylist, I'm not purely just taking clothes and dressing a model, right? I'm trying to curate and create an environment of joy for whoever is in that space. So
I get that.
for me, it's not about what you learn in a practical environment or through, as you're saying, conventional, traditional ways, but it's what you apply to where you are. You know, there is the opportunity every single day in whatever job you have to do the work you're supposed to do, and whatever that work is for you, whether it is making somebody feel good about themselves, whether it is giving somebody an opportunity to be the best version of themselves, whether it is acknowledging somebody, seeing a person, showing up for them, whatever it is that you need that work for you to be, is not defined by the job you do.
I get that.
Right? So I have fashion is a place where we get to recreate environments and people and energy, and we get to recreate that all the time, right? Just through simple, the way we dress or the way we're dressing someone.
Aesthetic.
And that's accessible to everyone and anyone. I mean, I'm a thrifter, right?
Yeah.
So it's not that I am prevented by having access to great fashion because I can't afford it. I just find it in places that are more accessible to me.
Stylist-free fashion is commercialized, right?
I've never thought of it that way, actually. Yeah, but not even fashion's not always commercialized because, you know, again, there is the opportunity. Now we have fashion swaps, so there's not even an exchange of currency. There's you know, so it's interesting how all the adages and lines that we hold onto are so past-based, where it doesn't really apply to us anymore. Like exactly what you said.
Yeah.
Fashion is not the commercialized version anymore. Because it has become, even things like where you have retailers who traditionally one couldn't necessarily afford to purchase something from, now have rental spaces, right?
That's true.
So it's not just about commerciability. I think when we bring in the alignment of the work, right? Not the job.
Yeah,
the
not
work,
the job,
right? The work. So think of a brand who's selling clothing, right? They are clearly selling clothing. That is their business, okay? That's their job. But perhaps the work they're doing is educating consumers on how to be mindful about the environment, right? By only using materials that are kind to the planet or sustainable, right? So that's their work, right? Your work is not defined by the job you do. So even though fashion can be seen as a commercial exercise, think about how many brands are educating consumers about making mindful choices, right?
I get that.
About not over-consuming, about supporting local, about being mindful about the purchase, that what are you purchasing into? How is your purchase affecting the planet, right?
I love that. As someone who's worked in the fashion industry, especially from starting in magazines, right, The guest we had before, Tatenda, me and him were talking about how magazines were such a huge inspiration point for different creatives, right? And magazines eventually have become Instagram, right? Now, in 2025, there's so many South African-born fashion companies that are shifting the landscape of fashion around the world, right? From Tebe Magugu to Makosa, those are the best examples I can use, but there's so many, right? Now, as someone who's seen the different eras, how has this shifted and changed from when someone snuck you in to today? What
It's
has
called
been
choice.
the
Choice. In the past, magazines dictated who would be seen. Today, we decide who we want to see.
I hear that.
I decide who I want to invest in, whether that is in terms of time, money, or energy. So with something like Meta, with Instagram, with the platforms that creatives now have access to, it is communities, people are choosing whether they are relevant to them in their lives or not, as opposed to them telling who is relevant to their lives or not. So if you look at the old magazines, the difference is, obviously the differences are obvious, but the most fundamental difference is that each magazine had its own target market, right?
Yes,
I don't have
course.
to mention any names of any
Yeah,
magazines,
of
you
course
know
not.
exactly.
Yeah, we know.
Every magazine had its own unique selling proposition, right?
Community.
Their community.
Yeah.
So there were little pockets of communities, right? And within those pockets, they defined what their vision was and who had access to that vision, right? When Instagram or any visual platform that was now accessible to the world, a brand or a designer or a creative created their own environment and communities chose them. So that for me is the fundamental difference in we don't have to sneak anybody in anywhere anymore.
At all.
But if you're showing up in a way that is authentic and of value to somebody else, that's where your alignment and community starts to grow in a way that is authentic and aligned. Right?
I hear that. I completely hear that.
So for me, it's not about anymore where you live or what you have access to. If you've got access to the internet, Wi-Fi, you are connected, right? And the joy of that connection is that you are choosing who you want to connect with. And if it's not aligned to you, you leave there. So it's no longer that brands have the power, or that we have the power.
We have the power now.
If you are not resonating with me the way I want to show up in the world, or with the intentions that I feel are important to me, or if you're not seeing me, or you're not including me, then I'm not going to be part of your community, right? So I'll go to somewhere else. So we hold so much more power.
I get that.
And I think that the value in that for the designers and from a creative perspective is, again, the work they're doing, not their job. What are they actually showing? And from a South African perspective, the designers that you have just mentioned, they are flying a flag.
Very high.
Right? Very high, which gives hope, opportunity, joy, possibility to somebody else who is following them to go, oh my God, this is possible. I can do this.
I get that.
That's the work that they're doing.
I get that. I get that. As someone who comes from, what can I say, an analog space, right? We're living in a digital space now, right? We were having the conversation earlier that analog art is greater than digital art.
I don't think it's fair to compare. It's very much apples and pears for me.
Okay. What I really want to get to the center of is, do you think the fashion community now, in this time that we're living in, where we have all this access to information, it's actually an information overload, right? Are people more inspired? Are they creating greater art? Obviously, that's subjective, because great art will always be subjective. It can never be objective. But from your subjective view, is fashion, like the creative element in fashion, is it getting better the more access we have to information? Or is it getting worse because we have way too much information and we're all following or drinking from the same well of inspiration?
So I think that you can very much differentiate the wells. I don't think we're all drinking from the same well. Okay. So I think that, again, it's about making conscious choices about what it is we are doing, who we are following, who we are investing in, where we are putting our energy and time. So from a consumer's perspective, I think that it is overwhelming, the amount of fashion that is out there, but it gives us informed choices. There are no excuses. We can make informed choices about who we want to support, where our hard-earned money is going, and why we want to support that person. It gives us, from a designer perspective, I think that there is far more access to inspiration as to what you could be doing with your clothing. I don't believe there is anything that comes from nowhere. We are all influenced, inspired by something. Upcycling of denim is not a new thing,
of course,
right?
not.
But the fact that it is an available space to work in means that designers or creatives have access to being inspired by where they are choosing to live, right? And when I say live, I mean invest in. Yeah. What brand you're deciding to be inspired by, which creatives you're being inspired by. So I don't think that what is being created is better or worse. I think it's more informed. And also it's just, I think the way we are shopping has changed, and the way we are creating has changed, and the way we are investing in fashion has changed. What we are creating from, what the creatives are creating and why they're creating it has changed.
Yo, please grab this. Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah.
The intention behind what we're doing has changed, and that has created new designs and a new way of working. It's so layered. A lot of our South African designers are influenced by heritage.
Yes, of course.
Right, so that heritage is different for every designer, right? Which gives it different handwriting.
Yeah.
A lot of our designers are driven by what they have access to in terms of fabrications. We don't have our own fabric mills anymore. So there's that limitation, right? And that influences what fabrics you use. If you are a sustainable designer where you're only using fabrics that are kind to the environment, that will further influence the way you're designing and what you're designing. So I don't think it's as simple anymore as saying
this is better
than that. Yeah, I think that there is, trends, obviously, if you're a trend-based purchaser or shopper or a trend-based designer, then that is the level that you are operating on, in terms of what is better or more current or... So there's so many layers as to...
It's nuanced.
I understand. Totally nuanced.
I personally just think analog is better than digital.
Okay,
because you care more.
No, so it's not about caring more. It is caring more now because of what the expertise now looks like in terms of analog. Take, for example, the turn of the century, when portraits were only done by artists, okay? You would sit to have your portrait done, right? And an artist would literally paint you. And it was all about painting you in the likeliness of you, right? It had to be real, like you wanted the painting to look like you. Then all of a sudden, something comes along where a person puts a hood over their head and there's a big pop,
Yeah.
the first photograph, right?
Yeah.
And that's totally in your likeness.
Yeah.
What do the artists say? What is this?
What is this?
What
Yeah,
is
yeah, yeah.
this? Is not art.
That's
This is
true.
a person just doing one
They're
click.
cheating.
They're cheating.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So
Right.
you know where I'm going. The one doesn't necessarily replace the other.
Yeah.
But you know, in life, we are, and especially now, we are all about creating things quickly and with the least bit of resistance, right? Time is money. So digital makes things happen quicker.
Yeah.
But when you go back to analog, in any version, there is a skill base there.
Yes.
And you still have the choice to go there. You're going to pay more for it, though.
That is true. That is very
So that's
true.
where it becomes, for me, whether it is accessible or not.
I get that. I get that.
Because I can still go tomorrow and have my portrait painted by an artist.
That's true.
It's going to cost me a
lot
lot
of
more
money, yeah.
than somebody just taking a picture of me on their cell phone.
the cell
It's
phone,
still
yeah.
me.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
again, for me, it's all about the intention behind what it is we are wanting. Yeah.
I get that.
So analog has its place.
Digital
Digital
also
has its place. And I
right.
don't think the two need to be compared to each other unless it is something where it is a choice that I would prefer to go to somebody who is an artisan, who is skill-based. You know, it's the same thing about why we go to, you know, as a coffee drinker. You know, coffee is accessible to everywhere. You can go to, and not to disrespect any supermarket where you can get a coffee.
Yeah.
But you can also go to a barista.
Yeah.
where-
Who's like a professional.
right? It's not to pair the two against each other. It's a choice you are making.
I get
That is where I would prefer to pay more to have an artisan deliver me something which I feel has a value to me because it's taken time, it's taken skill.
I hear
So
that.
it's the nuances.
It's the nuances. And I think you're one of the first people who comes from an analog time who's made me understand that one isn't actually better than the other. And I appreciate that. Thank you for that.
It's, you know, it's the same as if you look at most of our photographers today,
Yeah.
most of the photographers that I work with carry a point and shoot. Because there's always a sense of, there's a romance, right, involved with something which is skill-based.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
There's a romance.
Yes.
It's like, as a designer, you creating your own print by hand as opposed to digitalizing it.
Yes.
It's just, there's a romance involved there.
Yeah.
It feels more personal,
Yeah, it's
right?
way more personal.
Way more personal. It has part of you in it. Exactly how a painter has a part of him or her in it when they are painting a portrait.
I get that.
So there's, again, it's the emotional connection. And with fashion, we are only purchasing from an emotional perspective. We are purchasing fashion that makes us feel
a certain way.
a certain way,
That's
right?
true.
Nobody needs another tracksuit. Nobody needs another set. Nobody needs another pair of sneakers.
That's true.
And nobody needs another pair of denim jeans,
That's
right?
true.
But we will continue to purchase those items from brands or designers that we are aligning to emotionally. And whatever that layer is for you as a creative or as a person wearing those designs, that's where the nuances for me are so exciting.
I get that. I want to talk a little bit about you being a fashion stylist, right? I've always wondered, because a lot of crafts, you can understand how people build their skill sets, right? Now, in something as abstract as styling, how did you actually get better and better? And how do you work on the craft of styling?
Well, again, so my job is not the work I do. My work is to make sure that people feel honored, seen, and valued in my space where I am in. When I'm in a space with a person, I'm there to acknowledge them as part of the offering. So I'm very particular with regards to who I work with. in terms of which brands.
Okay.
So that everything aligns for me on a level of integrity.
Okay.
So the majority of brands that I will work with will either have a sustainable aspect to their portfolio or they're local. And I studied psychology. That was one of the things I studied.
One of your building blocks.
That was one of my building blocks. So when as a stylist, it's all about psychology.
Of course.
We are just, stylists are the lowest paid psychologists. That's all we are.
I love that.
As are designers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
because what you are doing is you are technically dressing a person's emotional deficit. That's really what stylists do.
Internal to external. I love
We're dressing people's emotional deficits, right? We have, especially as women, we have a lot of the time, unhealthy perspectives of ourselves in terms of our physical presence, in terms of how we should or shouldn't look, who are we dressing for? Are we dressing for ourselves or are we dressing for somebody else's gaze?
Yes.
So there's a lot of emotional nuances that go into getting dressed, right?
Yeah.
So as a stylist, when I am working with a brand, and what I feel a lot of stylists neglect, is that every element of clothing that you are putting forward onto that person, has to resonate as a cue for the brand, right? Every bit of clothing you put onto a person is a visual cue for a brand, and not necessarily a brand of clothing. I'm saying if I'm doing an advertising job, right? Say I'm dressing for, I'm doing a car job, okay? It's a Mercedes. The styling platform is always the last thing to be considered, but it should be the first.
That's so true.
It should be the first. Because if you are my character that I'm dressing, and you are in an ad for Mercedes, and I get the visual cues wrong for the Mercedes community, how is that believable? It's done, right? So the way I have crafted my skill is by being authentic in what I do. I research the brands that I work with to see who their community is or which community it is they are after, so that the way I'm dressing or styling, that my visual cues are aligned to that brand's community, right? If it's not for a brand, for example, if I'm doing a job for, say, a clothing brand, okay? It's not an advertising job. So say I'm doing a job for Dead, right? We're doing a styling job for Dead, we're doing a lookbook. I need to make sure that the person that I'm dressing feels amazing in what they are wearing. And that is the difference between styling and getting dressed. Because the same person can wear a pair of Dead track pants differently to somebody else. The way that's styled. But the person that I'm given as my subject, as a stylist, I need to dress their emotional deficits. So if they are not crazy, for example, about their ankles, right? And I'm going to put them in a pair of track pants, I'm not going to pull that up because it's going to not make them feel confident, and they're not going to be able to perform to the best in their ability. They can't show up in the best version of themselves for the brand. So as a stylist, we are responsible for providing our subjects with the most confident narrative for them to walk a confident, or to have a confident dance with the clothing that they're wearing. And as a stylist for an advertising brand, I have to ensure that the way I am styling that subject is aligned to the market they are trying to penetrate or connect with. So it's something which you never stop learning, right? So as a stylist, I never stop learning. I'm influenced continuously every day because I'm working with different people every day, right? I'm having to read my room very quickly. I'm having to research where a brand wants to go. And the interesting thing is most brands don't even know where they want to go.
Yes.
And I have to provide that without saying that I know.
Yeah.
Right? Because this world that we work in from a creative perspective is very much based in a place of fear.
Yeah.
Everybody's scared of making a decision in case that decision causes them to lose their job, right?
Yeah.
So nobody wants to take ownership, or very few people
Take
want to
ownership.
take ownership of making a decision.
I get
But
that.
stylists have to make that decision continuously because we are dressing the visual narrative of your brand. So
You've just reverse engineered what stylists actually do.
we don't just dress people. If that was the case, we wouldn't be needed,
Yeah, at all.
right?
Thank God you went and studied psychology, because actually now it makes sense in your journey why it was important for you to go and study that.
Well, it's like when we lean into, that's why I say things are a bit of luck. Things are just a bit of, we land in places not always knowing why, but it's very important to be able to see the opportunity when it's there.
Yeah.
To take it.
Yeah.
And that's where I say, we as South Africans, we are so good at showing up in a place. We see opportunities and we grab them because we know that it might not come again, right? So when you are grabbing that opportunity, you've got to show up in the best way you can with all the knowledge. It's not necessarily what you've learned in a traditional way, but you've got to bring the work you do to your job.
I get that.
So
I get that.
Stylists do a lot more than just
Way
dress
more.
people.
Way more. As someone who, once again, has seen the different eras, right? Worked with different fashion brands. We're living in a time where brands basically become the biggest thing overnight and then very soon disappear, right? I won't mention any of those brands, but we live in a time where everyone's trying to get hot, but no one's actually trying to build a legacy brand, right? Very few people are building legacy brands, where actually is what I think should be the goal, right? Now, from your perspective, what do you think are some of the things young designers, young brand owners need to be thinking about when building their brands? Because I'm sure you've seen brands like come in, they're the biggest thing, and you've also seen brands that have like transformed through the different eras. What do you think are the golden threads that people need to be using to stitch their brands together?
I think it's not just relating to designers or brands. I think it's relating to the way you show up. So I have an attitude towards anything that I do, that if I didn't need to do it for money, and if my job didn't depend on it, how would I do it differently? Right? If I was a designer and I didn't need this design to sell,
You were just doing it.
how would I do it differently? I'm doing it out of just an emotional connection, a passion, a joy. There's no other consequences. I'm not doing it to make my mom happy. I'm not doing it so that I can show the person I'm no longer involved with what a success I am. I'm not doing it because I need to prove to anybody but myself something that I can do. If I didn't need to create this design in order for it to be a success, whether it be financial success, with whatever it is, if I am creating this design for me to show up in the best version of me, what would I do differently? So I think a lot of times in the creative world, we are very much driven by the wrong things, right?
Ego.
Sometimes ego's a good thing
I think
because it
ego's a
gives you
great thing.
it gives you a personal way to propel yourself, right? But when you are, if you're creating a design to make money, then we start compromising what it is we're doing. Either compromising it from a point of view of integrity or compromising from a point of view of actual design, right? Something as simple as, okay, maybe I shouldn't put those buttons on because they're too expensive and it's going to make it more, not as, it's going to affect the price, or let me sew the pocket so that it's a mock pocket.
Yeah.
My worst. Do not give me, don't give me, I've got like a few pet hates in fashion.
Yeah.
A mock pocket,
Is one of those.
Wrong.
Yeah.
You let me choose whether I want to put my hand in there or not.
Or
Don't make
not.
that decision for me.
I hear that.
Any shirt where the buttons, especially in female fashion, end here. Don't make those choices for me. Okay, so you may have decided that, well, the trend is, women are wearing their shirts unbuttoned. So to save money on my design, I'm going to not do the 3 that should go up here, and I'm not going to do the 3 buttonholes that should go up there, right? Compromising.
Yeah.
But as aware of it, don't tell me where I need to stop buttoning my shirt. Worst of all, and this is also with women's fashion, is those tops that tell me I have to tie them.
The ones with
Those
back.
2 tails. Like, no. Do not tell me that I have to tie my top. What if I don't want to? So those kind of things from a design perspective. If you didn't have to if it was not about making the money, if what you're designing is not about making the money, if making that design is not about you keeping your job as a designer, what would you do differently? You cannot defend anything that you don't believe in.
I hear that. I hear that.
You can't.
I'm going to push back slightly, right? Because creatives like to create, right, from this idealistic, perfect world scenario place, right? But where I bring pushback is commercialization, right? In terms of that, it's great. I can make the greatest t-shirts in South Africa. But if no one buys those t-shirts, right?
Then they're not the greatest, my friend.
What I said was art is subjective and not objective. The only way we can objectively measure art is through commerce. That's the only objective from my perspective, right? So how do young designers balance I'm creating this t-shirt because this is the t-shirt that I would wear and I think it's amazing, and then meeting the market of the environment, right? Like, how do we balance those 2 worlds, like your internal world and the external world?
Well, I mean, are you talking purely about from a point of fashion design?
Yes.
So firstly, the
design.
platform of fashion design, of where the community that we are wanting to sell to has changed. Not every designer has to have a bricks and mortar store.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? So you can have Shopify, you can sell it for your Instagram account. So if you're saying about the commerciability, if I make 5 t-shirts that are meaningful to me, and I put them on my Instagram account, the community is already following me. There already is a connection to who is following me, be they friends, family, or foes. There is a connection.
Friends, family, or foes. I hear
There is a connection there already.
Yeah.
So there is a possibility that if what you are creating is not being sold, then you are selling it to the wrong community, surely.
That's true. That's true. So just find a new community.
Well, the community will find you. It's not that, I think it's a bit of a play. It is a bit of a push and a play, a give and a take. But there, from a point of view of authenticity, that is what people are buying into, is authenticity. So whatever that authenticity looks like, whether it is a brand that is authentic to being sustainable, right? And it is a design that is relevant and on trend. I'm getting two ticks there. If it is a friend of mine who is starting off their collection and they're doing caps, and you're saying it's about being commercial, so how many of those caps do you need to sell in order for that to be a success for you?
Yeah.
Because as a friend, if I'm there to support and help you, I'm buying one, right? Yeah. That's what friends do. We support each other.
That's true. That's very true.
Right?
Yeah.
And through them putting on that cap and tagging your brand on their Instagram, their community has now access to you.
And then now...
So that for me is being commercial. It's not just about a bricks and mortar store.
I get that. I get that.
So it's about being authentic for me. Design needs to be authentic. You know, it's everybody, you're saying like there's from one pool. That means when you are not bringing yourself into it. So, you know, everyone's doing sets, okay? Yeah. Everyone's doing sets. Yeah. But is anybody doing the set you're doing?
Yes. Your fingerprint is your fingerprint in the world, right?
Yeah.
I understand.
And it has to resonate with who you are as a designer.
I get that. I get exactly what you're saying. I just had to give pushback because I don't like to live in an idealistic world because that's not grounded in reality, right? I like to live in the dream world and in the real world at the exact same time because we need to. Like, you can't completely live in a 3D world and you also can't completely live in the dream world. You have to find the balance.
I think without the dream, the reality is very two-dimensional. I think you have to have the dream.
1000%.
And you also, you know, you need to have certainty that what is meant for you is already on its way to you. But it can't be on its way to you if you haven't put in what is intentionally authentic to you.
I get
right?
That. I get that. I get that. Makes sense. Makes sense. 2025, South African fashion. Are you happy? Are you
ecstatic? Ecstatic
about everything that's happening.
Because, and once again, because of the accessibility that every creative person has, means that there is so much more opportunity for up-and-comings, young designers, young creatives to have a platform, right?
Yeah, yeah. I hear that.
And the fashion that's coming out of South Africa, which is what I said before COVID to now, 2025, it's so dynamic.
Yeah.
It's so relevant. It is, I feel, the most incredible time to be a South African, where you can truly say proudly South African by seeing all of these new, fresh labels. It doesn't make a difference if there's only 2 designs. It's 2 more designs that they have now than they wouldn't have had 5 years ago, right?
That's true. That's
true.
So
from a fashion perspective, I think there is just an overflowing, positive, exciting, huge space for every creative to show up in their own version.
Yeah, in their own way.
In their own way. I mean, comparison is the greatest thief of joy, right? Which is where we feel, or where I feel sometimes social media is an evil, right? You've got to stand in your own truth, bring in your own integrity, honesty, and joy. If you didn't depend on this job, and you didn't depend on this design making money, what would you do differently? That's where the authenticity comes in.
I hear that. I hear that.
And I think there is so much, you know, as South Africans, we are so, we know how to upcycle everything.
Literally.
We know how to upcycle emotions. right? We know how to, it's not just about clothes. We are the most positive nation.
Yeah.
We see possibility even in the most darkest, scariest times. We see possibility.
And we'll turn that into
We
something.
turn it into something. So as designers, with that kind of intuitive, emotional connection as South Africans, that's the base that we're coming from. So imagine if every fashion designer came from that perspective with regards to what it is they're designing to.
I hear that. I hear that. This has been such an enlightening conversation for me. I've really enjoyed it. I know that there's going to be someone, as we're winding this down, there's definitely someone who's going to be watching this who's studying psychology or who is studying various disciplines. And it's like, I've always wanted to go work in fashion, and Robyn's story is really inspiring me. What's your last piece of advice to the dreamers out there?
When an opportunity presents itself, grab it. Whatever that opportunity is for you, show up, grab it, and own it. People are in successful places. It's a mix of luck and a mix of timing and a mix of skill and expertise. But at the end of the day, you've got to show up and you've got to see what opportunities and possibilities exist and literally just grab it. Every job I ever had was really either luck or something I created for myself, which is why when you ask me, what is it that I do?
Connect dots.
I connect dots.
I love that. That's my favorite answer I've ever heard on Dead Radio. Connect dots. Thank you for connecting our dots.
Thank you for connecting my dot to yours.
Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and we'll be back with another episode of Dead Radio.